Well, it's that time, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you folks for being here. We certainly appreciate it. This will be the 14th Town Hall meeting that Paul and I have done in New Ulm. We've done them at all times of the day. We've done them in the morning, we've done them in the afternoon, we've done them in the evening. It seems the best turnout we get usually is in the morning. So here we are today. Just wanted to talk a little about the process, kind of the end and the finish of the session, and then I'll turn it over to Paul, Representative Paul Torkelson, who is my representative, and I'm very fortunate to have Paul in this side of my district. We work very well together, work on a lot of the bills together, and do a lot of discussing of issues between the House and the Senate, not issues between us, but issues that both the House and Senate are working on. It was quite an interesting session when we got toward the end. Come Saturday, it became quite evident we were not going to be able to get all of the paperwork completed and everything processed, so we did talk to the governor, and he did agree that come Monday night, if some of the stuff wasn't processed, we would turn around at 12:01 a.m. on Tuesday morning and go back into special session so we could get these things worked out. One of the things was a little bit different this year is we decided, the House and the Senate decided to take a little different approach to the session this year. And most of you probably heard us talk on the radio and probably saw some stuff in the newspaper, how we moved everything ahead about 30 days when it come to our deadlines for our bills, things like that. And the reason we did that is we wanted to have extra time at the end for negotiations. As things started moving along, it took a while to get the governor in the negotiations, which we did get. He did get involved toward the end, and the governor did have his staff working with us. So all of the bills that got passed that the governor signed yesterday and last night, all of those bills were pre-approved by both the House and Senate and the governor. So there were no surprises. The governor knew what was in those bills. We knew what was in the bills because, like I said, they'd been all agreed to before we passed them off of the floors and sent them over to the governor for signature. However, what happened is we could not get the paperwork fully processed, and so we went into special session. When you go into special session, it kind of opens up, all the bills have to be redone under special session numbers versus regular session numbers, so that does take some time. And of course, then that opens up opportunities for changes. So there were some negotiations on changes that would be possibly included in the bills. That was actually pretty minor, but the Health and Human Services bill, as we got into that, there was an amendment that was going to be required, and there was some language in the amendment needed to be changed, and that's about an 12 to an 18-hour process to redo the Health and Human Services bill. So we ended up getting done Friday morning about 3:30 in the morning, but we did get the legislation passed. Governor Dayton has signed the legislation. There's a few hiccups. Apparently, he would just as soon not have the legislators in session for the next two bienniums. So in his bill, or he has a line item vetoed the funding to run the legislative body, so that we'll see how that plays out, but I'm not too concerned about that because of the issues as far as crossing between the lines of the executive versus the legislative, but we'll see where that goes. But there was a lot of legislation got passed. There was some good legislation in education, health and human services, and we got a transportation bill. Paul chaired that and can talk about that. Our transportation bill is the first transportation bill of any size we've had since 2008. The first tax bill we had in the last 3 years, first bonding bill we've had in the last 3 years. So there was a lot of things that got moved forward we've worked on for some time. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my representative, Paul Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Senator Dahms. Good morning, everyone, and nice of you to turn out this morning, and we'll get to questions here in just a couple of minutes. If I look a little tired, it's because I spent all day yesterday flying around the state. I was lucky enough to be invited by the Speaker and the Majority Leader of the Senate to join in on their fly-around as they started in St. Paul. We went to Rochester, Mankato, Moorhead, and Duluth, and then back to St. Paul. Had a chance to spread the good news across the state. We believe that this has been a very good session for the citizens of Minnesota. We have a complete budget passed and signed by the governor. It wasn't at that time, but it is now signed by the governor. Of course, nobody gets everything they want in these procedures. We had to give up things that we wanted. The governor had to give up some things that he wanted. But we also got things that we wanted, and the governor got things that he wanted in the end. But it's been a good session, a long, challenging session. As Gary mentioned, I was fortunate enough to be chair of the House Finance Transportation Committee this year. It was a new job for me, a new committee for me, actually. But I took on the challenge, and my goal was to get a transportation bill passed and signed, and we accomplished that. As Gary mentioned, it's the largest transportation bill in the history of the state of Minnesota, actually. Not without its own set of controversies, but at least we're moving forward. It's my goal that we pass a transportation bill every biennium. I think that's what needs to happen, because when we don't get one passed, then transportation falls further behind. With that, I'm very happy to have you here this morning, and I think we should get to questions, because that's what you really came here for. So.
And I think the process we'll follow is this is being recorded. So if somebody has a question, if you would hold up your hand, we'll recognize you, and then you can state your name, and then this young lady will bring the mic, and so then you can go ahead and ask your question. But do state your name and stuff so that the people that are here know who's asking the question. So with that, we'll go ahead, and who has a question? Yes.
Very good. Good morning. My name is Connie Neal, and just wanted to say a special thank you to both Paul and Gary for their hard work this year at the legislature. I know it was nuts. I was up there a number of days, as Gary is aware anyway, and it seemed like every day it snowed when I was there, but that's the way it is. I would like to ask you a little bit about the property tax issues and how they finally turned out with regard to Representative Drazkowski's bill. And then also, I would just like to remind the two of you that you are both part of the informal committee that I and the 5th Judicial District Republican Committee have put together. And Gary probably knows this, but I was meeting with most of the state senators on the Judiciary Committee, and it turned out very, very well, and would very much like to have your assistance this summer, because JD5 would like to be educated by you. I had also talked with Marty Seifert about it, and he would be willing. So I hope you will do that. And then back to the original question, which is regarding the property tax bill and or any other issues with regard to that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Connie. The Drazkowski bill is a bill that dealt with the ag property tax in relationship to the capital improvements at the local school districts. That was in our tax bill last year, and that tax bill never got signed. That was back in the tax bill this year, which did get signed, and it will go into law. And what it amounts to is if a school district has a capital referendum, capital improvement, and you're being taxed on your tax statement for that improvement, the state will pay 40% of that tax. So if you have a $10 tax on your tax statement for the local school district's capital improvements, the state's going to pay $4 of that, and you would pay the $6. So we're going to pick up 40% of that. We looked at that bill. The last couple of years, we spent a long time looking at that process, and the problem we have is we have a lot of small school districts to where a large percent, some as high as 87%, are being paid by the ag property tax. If we took a look at how we would change that tax, if we took a look at shifting it throughout the school district, what we found is it would drive the tax on homes very high and drive the tax on business considerably higher. So fortunately, the metropolitan legislators are willing to work with us, and we came up with this program to where 40% would be paid. That comes out of the general funds, so the state as a whole is helping subsidize that process so that we could keep these taxes down. So that is in the bill and was passed this year.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that information.
Yep.
And just, I think, Paul, you know that my mother, my 92-year-old mother, was at the Capitol at the request of Representative Drazkowski, and she testified in front of one of the committees on the bill. And so she will be very happy to hear that, so thank you very much.
You bet. Other questions?
Good morning. My name is Megan Benage, and I'm here representing the League of Women Voters, and I'm a citizen of New Ulm. Woohoo! So, glad you guys are both here. I wrote down my notes. I'm not going to, Snapchat you or anything. Don't worry. So, we're going to start with a fun one.
I wouldn't know how to be Snapchatted, so.
It can happen, and you don't even know it's happening.
Really? Oh, my.
It's real. So, let's start with a fun prairie wetland one. So calcareous fens are a rare wetland. They're groundwater fed, and I think you guys both know this. They took over 4,000 to 11,000 years to form, and we only have about 200 of them in the state. And they're pretty amazing. But in addition to being pretty amazing, they're our first signal to us that something's wrong with our groundwater if they disappear. So Senator Weber introduced into the Environment Omnibus Bill particular language that would allow a handful of irrigators in Pipestone County to pump groundwater. Whether or not it harmed the fens, they would pump them for a period of 15 years. If after 5 years, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources determined that they were harming the fen, then they could stop the permit, revoke it, they would have to stop pumping, but the Department of Natural Resources would be on the hook to pay the irrigators back for their equipment. So what I want to know, this legislation for me left kind of a sour taste in my mouth because it just seemed like benefiting a handful of folks when a lot of citizens in Pipestone County depend on that groundwater. And so what I want to know is, were you in support of that legislation or not in support of it? And I know that it has since been changed, and it just includes a little line item in there that says the DNR may allow temporary drawdowns if that jives with a management plan.
Well, thank you for that question. The issue of groundwater protection, water quality, irrigation as opposed to other groundwater uses is complex and ongoing. The calcareous fens in particular are, kind of unusual features on the landscape that where groundwater is coming to the surface and supporting a certain set of habitat and plants. So there are these conflicts, and how we resolve those is very important to the success of our economy at the same time as we want to protect the environment. And I believe the compromise that was reached was a reasonable one. The DNR has been much more aggressive on how they administer irrigation permits in recent history. And the transition has not been all that smooth, frankly. In the past, the DNR administered irrigation permits in a very kind of haphazard manner. It was a paper form you filled out. It wasn't very accurate. It wasn't very well monitored. And now they've switched to a much more aggressive system of monitoring and permitting. And it's still in the works. And chickens are benefiting. Southwestern Minnesota in particular has got groundwater challenges. We know that. We know that it's been that way for forever, really. Groundwater has been less available and of poor quality forever. And that's why the Lewis and Clark Pipeline Project is coming in to bring water into that part of the state. And these issues are not over. They continue. I serve as co-chair of the Legislative Water Commission, and these are exactly the sort of things that the Water Commission will continue to look at and try to work for practical solutions to these issues. We want, water is critical to our health and our economy at the same time as we try to protect the environment, and it's no simple task.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Gene Brand from Hanska. You folks in your infinite wisdom have raided the Treasury and are going to give back much of the tax money to us citizens. My question is, how much money am I going to get, and on what basis have you decided how much I'm going to get?
Thank you for the question, sir. Could you clarify what you mean we raided the Treasury? We have $650 million that is what in our tax bill. Keep in mind that includes LJ for your local city, which Hanska is part of that. It includes CPA for the county program aid, which Brown County is part of that. It includes money for college tax credits for students. It includes money for loan payment for student credits for students. It includes family tax credits. There's a lot of things went into that. Probably the piece that you may get some part of, and then again you may not, because I don't know what your income is and I'm not asking. But under the Social Security provision, currently if you're earning about $30,000 to $35,000, you're probably not paying state tax on your Social Security. That has been moved up, and it's on a sliding scale, and so you would have a reduction in the amount of income tax you pay on Social Security up to like $100 and some thousand, and then there would be no reduction in payment on your Social Security for the state of Minnesota. The other thing that you may be referring to would be the estate pass-through. Right now in Minnesota, next year it's at 1.8 million this year. 2018 it goes to 2 million. And in 4 more years, then it will go to 3 million. And that's the amount of estate tax. That's the amount of, the 3 million is the dollars you would not pay the estate tax on before you started paying estate tax in Minnesota. Now, Minnesota has an interesting way of doing it. Most states that have estate tax, which a lot of them do not, you would pay, after you hit the $3 million, the next dollars would be your lowest tax rate. And it would go up as the value of your state went up. Minnesota does that in reverse. The next dollar is the highest tax rate, and as your estate goes higher and higher, your tax rate reduces. So you probably could account, you probably would have something in there. I don't know if I wouldn't think you'd have many student loans at this point, and I don't think you're probably looking for college credits, but you may be, family tax credits may be something you would get. The other thing that we had in that tax bill was to conform to the federal conformity on a lot of the different family tax credits they have, and that was $48 million to conform to that. In the past, what we have done is one of the first things we do the first or second day of session is we conform to that. This year we put it in the tax bill, so we'll conform to it in the future, and we won't have to go in each session and reinstitute the confirmation of that. So that's kind of the things that are in the tax bill, so you can kind of figure out from there what may or may not benefit you. But there's going to be a lot of working families that are going to receive some credits in there because of this tax bill. And then again, the local government aid, the county program aid, all of those kinds of things are in there. Next question.
Well, we'll move on.
Let's kind
to
of move
others.
it around here.
Jean Prochnick, Auditor Treasurer, Brown County. Couple questions, if I might ask. I'll do them in pieces. Anything change with the buffer strip law? I have a lot of landowners that ask questions.
Right. There's certainly continues to be questions surrounding buffers, and I've been working on them personally since the beginning. We tried to get the first date pushed out to the second date so that everything would have the same compliance date, but the governor absolutely refused to do that. But what we did get is some language changes. You may or may not be familiar with the alternative practices that have been published now by the Board of Water and Soil Resources, that there's 6 actually, there will be actually 7, although the 7th one I think they might be adding to one of the others. Anyway, there's a number of alternative practices available, so that's important because that gives landowners and operators quite a bit of flexibility in how they comply with the buffer law. There's also significant funding for SWCDs, $22 million over the next biennium to fund our SWCDs all across the state. Those are the people that really offer the technical advice to get the right practice in the right place. There's also money in both the tax and environment bill that's available to counties that take jurisdiction, because what we want, I think everybody pretty much agrees, that this is best administered at the local level rather than at the state level. But counties will take on extra expense when they have to administer this program. So those funds will be available to counties that take jurisdiction so they can use that money to make sure that the right buffers are, again, the right practices and right buffers are in the right places. There's a couple of open questions. One being what happens with redeterminations on public ditches. Does that mean once a redetermination is in place that they have to have an alternative practice, or can we apply the alternative, once redetermination has happened, do they have to have a 16.5-foot buffer, or can we utilize alternative practices on those public ditches that have been redetermined? I believe we can use the alternative practices, but that's a step that is not clear in law at this point, and one that we will need to clarify, hopefully next year, if Governor gives us money to meet, that is. And the other big question in my mind is the availability of federal programs to enroll and re-enroll in federal programs on both ditch and, well, that'd be more on the public waters buffers. I believe the landowners should be able to utilize those federal programs in spite of this state requirement, and that question is still a little bit cloudy, and that's a question for the federal government, but we're working on that.
So the alternative practices would not apply to a redetermination that is being completed at this time?
Well, I think they should, and it's an issue I'm going to try to address actually right away, because this is...
It's a question I've had recently.
Right, and it's an appropriate question, one that we need to make. It needs to be clear from the Board of Water and Soil Resources just exactly how they're going to operate that. At this point, I would encourage folks to consider the alternative practices, because I think that is adequate.
Cool. Well, I will share that. As a follow-up question, I don't think anything really happened with election funding, if I read right. Is that correct?
I think I'll let Gary take that question.
You know, I'm not sure what was done. I know there was some money in the original bill, but I'm not sure how that came out.
Yeah.
I'd have to look it up to see
And
what was done. I thought there was some dollars for new equipment.
I know it was introduced, but I'm
In
not sure
there.
it passed.
I'm not familiar with the details, but we can sure find out for you, Gene.
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Next question. Yes, sir.
My name's Alan Augustine. I'm with the Smiles Center for Independent Living. We serve Region 9, and we have offices in Mankato, New Ulm, Fairmont, and Waseca. First of all, I'd like to thank both of you for supporting independent living and signing on to our bill. But that's not my question. My question is, with a $1.65 billion surplus, and I know both of you support this, what is it going to take to get raises for those people who work in group homes and do community support services?
We're just going to have to keep at it every legislative session until we get something moved. This session, I carried the bill in the Senate, and we got into the Health and Human Services Committee, and there started to be a discussion, and we haven't had this dynamic in the past, but there started being a discussion about how this was going to affect the homes that are unionized. And we thought we were going to be able to get something worked out there. We did not get that language worked out, but we did keep pushing the bill forward. But at the end of the day, with the cost of the increases in the Health and Human Services bill, we put $2.1 billion of new money in, and we just couldn't get it across the finish line. But I can tell you, we're not going to give up. We're going to keep at it, and eventually we will get we'll get it rectified. We just have to keep working at it. But I know that's not the answer you'd like to hear. You would like to hear something, you know, this is what we got to do. And really all we can do is just keep pushing that forward and try to get it to the top of the mix.
You know, the confusing part about this is the fact that when you look at that bill, the people who signed on, I mean, yeah, you can only have 5 authors on the Senate, but you look at the House side, you know, there was, I don't know how many, but, you know, more than 40 or 50 people, legislators, signed on to that. So, I mean, the support's there. And I also understand the money that would go to them is significant. It's a, you know, significant amount of money. So everything seems to be there, but you just, for some reason, can't get over the edge on this one.
And I agree. I mean, it is, we've got a lot of folks supporting the bill. And it just, we just couldn't get it over the finish line. And like I said, we will keep working to move that bill forward, and we'll keep pushing to get it forward, and eventually we'll get there.
Is there something else we can do?
You know, I think that you folks have done a very good job of laying out the process. When I had folks come in to testify, they did a very good job of testifying. They didn't leave any uncertainty as to why we needed to do this. I don't know if there's much more you can do. I think you've done a good job. There's a certain point to where maybe you can overwork an issue, and you certainly have not done that. I think that the work you've done has been very good, and I think you're at that spot to where we just keep working it at that level, and we just have to try to get it across the finish line.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question, and I certainly understand your concern, and believe me, we will keep working to try to move it forward. Next.
I too want to say thank you for the many grueling hours that I'm sure were put in the last several weeks. Mine comments have nothing to do with this past session. Instead, it's something, a project with which I'd appreciate receiving some help from both of you. It's been 20 years since New Ulm has had a low-income tax credit housing project. And in 2012, we had a housing study that said we should have 100 such units. Since that time, we have done none. So as I said, it's been 20 years. In that time, we've lost quite a few subsidized housing units. They have converted to market rate. We now have an opportunity to repurpose a historic structure that was a school and convert that to tax credit low-income housing, something that New Ulm, as do many other communities in Minnesota, has a dire need of. We need all types of housing, but this is a start. So we hope that both of you could support by contacting by letter Minnesota Housing Finance Agency and let them know that you support the application that will be put forward for that project.
Well, thank you, Mary Ellen, for bringing that up. And as you said, this is looking forward. I'm happy to do what I can, and I'll let Gary speak for himself, to assist in that process. I know there was significant amounts of money in the bonding bill for low-income housing, and I think that would apply in this situation, but I don't know all those details. But I'd be happy to work with you and others as we step through the process.
There's just a bit of urgency. Minnesota Housing Finance Agency does this once a year. They take applications in June. Community Housing Development Corporation, the entity that's going to be purchasing this property, will be submitting their application in June. The decision is made in October, and it's only once a year, so we have this one-time chance for this year. So any support of any kind that you can bring forward for that effort to make sure that this can happen for New Ulm would be wonderful.
Thank you.
I'd be more than happy to put in a letter of support. If you could give us some idea of kind of the parameters of what you want to do, we'd be more than happy to do that, absolutely.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank
It would
you.
give us 50 to 55 units, and that will
Yes,
help.
Absolutely, yep. Going back to your question, the auditor treasurer, on the election stuff, there is $7 million put into the bill this year for voting equipment for counties, and it's on a match type. Depending on what you do, it could be a 75-25, or it could be a 50-50, but there is $7 million in the bill. Yep. Next question. Yes, sir.
Scott Winchell, and as they had stated before, thank you for your service and your dedication, and the job I know you have is challenging. So, a couple of questions, Representative Torkelson. First, the buffer, having the counties go back to controlling or policing the buffers. There's funding going out now. Will the funding increase? Will the funding remain in future years? Or is this something that's only funded initially and then dropped off?
Well, I'm dedicated to continuing that funding for counties. This bill, the total of these two bills is, I believe, $16 million over the next biennium. We originally had it was $10 million in last year's tax bill that did not get signed. So the 16, we believe, will meet the need for this next biennium, and I'm dedicated to continuing that. I think it's the key. One of the keys to making this whole buffer, and it's not just buffers, because it's how we address water quality at the local level with the help of the county boards. They need to be involved, and I'm dedicated to continuing that.
But it's not legislatively in the law right now?
That's correct.
Okay. Other questions I had, if you could comment, there's a couple of them here. Student loan, what was done for that? Transportation, of course, we'd love to hear what's the final there, and the subsidy for individual health insurance premiums. What kind of legislative action was taken there?
Well, I'll take the student loan one. I don't have the exact layout. That's in the tax bill, but if you want to reference the tax bill, you could find that in there. But there is a credit for students that have student loans that they're paying back. There's a tax credit for that. But to get you the exact amount, you'd need to go into the bill. I can take the other part on the premium for the health insurance, and Paul, maybe you could take the transportation. We did pass a bill early in the session, and it's called the Premium Security Act. And what that amounts to is we'll be putting in money to do a reinsurance program. So one of the problems we have is that we can't get providers. When I say providers, that would be the insurance groups that I'm talking about, not the medical folks. We're having trouble getting providers to stay in the market due to the massive losses that they're experiencing. And the reason they're experiencing a lot of that is because there was original thought when MNsure came out that the people that were uninsured were going to be dispersed amongst the entire market, which was a fallacy because they couldn't be, because if you're on a group policy, you have to be accepted. So anybody that was uninsured because of pre-existing conditions, they were going to automatically come into the individual marketplace, and that's what happened. The original assumption was very low as far as the number of people that would be coming in and the cost. The cost for those folks to come in was about 5 times as much as what is expected. And so that, along with other things, drove these premiums sky high. So the program that we came up with is a reinsurance program, and the providers are agreeing to come back into the marketplace, so we should have at least 2 providers in every marketplace. Plus, that's going to allow, and then we have to have them in the various networks. So we should have all networks covered, plus 2 providers in each marketplace if it works the way it's designed to work. What happens is the insurance provider will pay the first $50,000 of claims on an individual. After they hit $50,000, then the reinsurance steps in and goes up and pays 80% of that up to $200,000. At $200,000, then the insurance company takes back over and pays the full. That is projected to reduce the rates about 18 to 20% over the undisturbed 2018 rates. So we should start seeing some rate reductions, but we also should start seeing more players in the marketplace. And so we feel that that's going to stabilize the market, bring in more players, and get more people into the networks. So that's the process that goes into effect for the 2018 market. Now, in order to do that, we were going to be penalized by the federal government because we're reducing premiums. And when you reduce premiums, you get penalized under the Affordable Care Act. That penalty just in the Section 132, which is just an acronym, but that was going to cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million. So what we've done is we're filing for a acceptance so that we get that money, and we get a waiver so we get paid that money. That waiver process started right away about the end of March, first part of April. It's already in the Department of Commerce is managing that. They've already went through all the steps. They're in the step now, effective May 15th to June 15th, is a public policy input, public input, and then when that's done, then our application will be sent to the CMS at the federal level, and they will evaluate it. And we've been working with them step by step on the process, on the application, and it would appear that when that gets submitted that we will get the exception so that we'll get that money back. Then there's the other portion of it, the basic health portion, and that's another chunk of money you lose when you drive down premium. But if we get the Section 1332 waiver, the BHP, the Basic Health Plan waiver, will automatically feather in with that. So it looks like we'll be held harmless there, which then makes this much more palatable to do that. So that's where that's at, and I have confidence that it's going to work. I mean, right now, we would have been scheduled to take another hit in premium like we did last year. That hit would have been there again if we could have found people to get in the marketplace. And so that's where that's at. Now I'll turn it over to Paul for the transportation.
Yeah, and I won't try to cover every part of the transportation bill or we'd be here till midnight or so. But just two very important changes in this year's transportation bill. One is continuing to offer money or to provide money for small cities. Those cities under 5,000 first got some funding in last year's transportation bill. We've continued that in this year's bill with $16 million for these small cities all across the state. In the past, they've gotten no help from the state with their streets, and they really appreciate what we did last year, and the $16 million is less than what I had originally proposed, $25 million. The Senate was at 20 or 10, and we ended up compromising at 16. The other big change is we've taken the local bridge fund, instead of funding that with bonding dollars, it's now funded in the transportation bill, and that is ongoing funding. So the local bridge program will be funded, and there's a cap in there that caps it at $7 million for any individual bridge. Because what's happened in the past, sometimes we have a very large local bridge in the metro area that can cost tens of millions of dollars, and it virtually empties the fund on one bridge. So we've capped it so we were funding these local bridges. They have a nice list of the bridges that are ready to go, and this will fund every bridge that's on the list for the next biennium. Of course, new bridges will come onto the list after that. As far as those large bridges go, they will still be funded through the bonding bill, and in fact, there is money in the bonding bill. So I believe at least the 10th Avenue Bridge in Minneapolis, which is about a $35 million project, will get funded through bonding. So we try to kind of balance it out between large and small bridges.
We had also spoke a little bit earlier about the county program aid. And just to touch base on the county program aid is dollars that the county gets from the state. And in the past years, as we saw the agricultural values go up, our ag counties have started to get less and less and less money. In some cases, some of the counties in my district don't get any dollars from county program aid anymore because of the fact that the ag land values are so high that put such a high tax base up there, and I know that Brown County certainly has been feeling the pinch of that. So the counties, all 87 counties, agreed that they would redo the formula, but it required us to put some money in order to make that change happen. So we did put in that money that was required this year. So now that formula will have changed, and with that change in formula, now it'll give our agricultural counties, they will get back some of the money that they've lost because of these high ag land values. So it was very important that this happened because, first of all, 87 counties agree to do this, which is kind of uncommon because some counties it'll make a difference in the bottom line as to what they're going to get, and certainly make a difference out in rural Minnesota, southwest Minnesota, where we have high land values. So that is something that was done, and that was the top priority for the Association of Minnesota Counties. So we were able to accomplish that, and that's something that needed to be done because it will help all of our counties, which is actually going to help the taxpayers because, you know, if the money doesn't come from the state, it has to come from the county, and the county has to get it from the taxpayers, so property tax. So there should be some help there.
I really appreciate that. The fact is that as you stated, the county program aid, once given to the county, is a tax reduction to the residents of Brown County because that's the way it is utilized. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. Next question. I think you got one here.
Thank you. I'm Tom Custer from New Ulm. We appreciate the work you do. We know that's not easy, and we thank you for that. But I'm worried about Highway 14. A rumor out there is that we may lose Highway 14 entirely because once the scheduled repavement is completed in a couple of years, there won't be any incentive to complete the 4-lane. Representative Torkelson, you're chair of the Transportation Committee. I congratulate you for being invited to fly around the state with the Republican leadership, but I wonder, with all the favor you enjoy up there, why couldn't you deliver for your constituents on Highway 14?
Well, the pressure's on, right? I'm very much in favor of finishing Highway 14. In fact, I talk about 14 all the way to the South Dakota border because just getting to New Ulm isn't good enough for me. Not that we'd necessarily go 4-lane, but maintaining that road, it's an important connection across east and west across southern Minnesota. I would love to just say, okay, guys, you're going to do 14, I'm chair, and here's the money, you do it. But that's not the way the system works. But what we've been successful with on Highway 14 is the Corridors of Commerce program. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that has identified these corridors that are connecting the regional hubs of the state, including New Ulm, Mankato, Rochester along Highway 14. We put $50 million each biennium of cash into Corridors of Commerce, plus a total of $300 million over the 4 years into bonding for Corridors of Commerce. Highway 14 has done very well under that program in the past, and I'm reasonably confident that at least part of the Highway 14 project will be funded through Corridors of Commerce in the near future. I can't guarantee that. You know, there are some folks that think that the legislature should make all the decisions as to which highways get funded. I don't buy into that personally, because if that was the case, we'd be making decisions about road funding based on politics, not based upon the real need and the statistics that the department analyzes to determine which projects are priority. I'd love to just say, Highway 14, here we go, but I don't think that's the system we want, because the next chair might not give a rip about Highway 14, and it would then be politically off the list. It should be based on the need. I think we've done a good job with the Highway 14 Coalition of demonstrating the need here for Highway 14 improvements, and I continue to support that. I'll be doing some arm twisting, not arm breaking, just arm twisting to try and continue to fund the work on Highway 14. We've made good progress. In my time in the legislature, we've gotten to Nicollet, so we've got that part done now, and that interchange is in place. We're going to be doing some work out here on the Highway 15-14 interchange here just outside of New Ulm. So we've got kind of the bookends in place, and I'm dedicated to doing everything I can to see that we fill in that gap with 4 lanes of highway. Will it happen immediately? Probably not. I think I don't know if you followed the Highway 60 situation back in 2008, when it was agreed that they would make Highway 60 4-lane all the way to the Iowa border, and that was actually written into legislation at the time. And there's just now starting on the last segment of that project. It's taken 10 years to get there. So highway funding is controversial and complicated, but I assure you that I'm doing everything I can to keep Highway 14 in the spotlight.
Josh, did you have a question?
Josh and Miriam Wilkening from New Ulm, Minnesota here. A question I wanted to ask you is that I understand that the final total increase in the biennial budget was about 9.5%. And, I wanted to certainly thank you guys for, working to balance the needs of, wanting some spending restraint along with some tax relief, of course, along with the, goal of actually getting something passed by a, very demanding governor. So thank you for, working on that. But I also wanted to ask you is that, are you concerned that with a 9.5% spending increase, that could potentially lead to deficits sometime, or what's the opposite of a surplus? A deficit, I guess. Right. At some point in the near future, when the next recession hits. And is that something that is concerning? Could lead to further tax increases or another budget boondoggle, sometime down the line.
Well, yeah, certainly, it is a concern. It's just like a big ship out at sea. It takes a long time to slow it down and make the turn. And this was still considerably hundreds of millions less than what the governor wanted in the spending bill. So it's more than I would like to have spent. I would have liked to seen that down probably another $600 to $800 million. But the reality is that if you're going to truly have compromise, you have to have give and take. And so I felt that I had to give up some things, or I felt we as the legislators had to give up some things that we didn't want to give up, and spending in some areas was part of that. Another thing that happened is, when you get to the tails, you could start manipulating tails. So if we take a look at education, we spent $1.3 billion new money in E12 education. However, with that said, we had $799 million of tails from last year. So yes, we spent $1.3 billion new money, but we actually, 800 million of that was from last year, so we spent 500 million in new money to get some of the programs beefed up and stuff. And we had an increase of 35,000 new students. So what it amounted to is, for those number of dollars, we got a 2% increase in 2018, another 2% in 2019. That money is put on the basic formula and goes to each individual the same no matter what school district you're in. So it gives our local schools some authority as to how to spend that money to get the best education they feel they can for their children. If you operate with less than a 2%, we're actually taking money out of the school coffers because their cost is about a 2% increase across the board. So even spending that much money, we just basically kept them whole. So there's where some of the dilemmas come in. And so those are choices we had to make. But like I say, it's a big ship at sea, and it takes a long time to slow it down and then to start turning it around. And some of that has to come from reform and efficiencies at the government level, and that's what we're working on.
Well, Josh, I absolutely share your concern about the growth of government and the cost of government. It's alarming, frankly, and this is also dramatically impacted by what may or may not happen at the federal level. So we're trying to keep an eye on all that. At the same time, we need to keep moving forward. A government shutdown is painful and costly and damaging for everyone. So we've come to a compromise with the governor to keep this state operating and moving forward. Gary talked about education, but we also need to talk about health and human services. That is eating up a huge portion of our state budget. It continues to grow at an alarming rate. Just one small example within my transportation area is Metro Mobility. It's a program that supplies rides to folks that can't utilize the normal public transit system, but instead they utilize Metro Mobility. They call up, they set in a time, and Metro Mobility picks them up and brings them to whatever they want to go to. It's a wonderful program, and it's a great benefit for those folks, but the costs are absolutely skyrocketing. And when those costs skyrocket, that takes money away from some other area, in this case, within transportation. So trying to balance these programs, supply the needs, the most dire needs of folks that really need these programs, but at the same time try to contain the cost is really hard work, very challenging. But that's what we need to address because it's the growth curve that really is causing the long-term problems. So absolutely share your concerns. Don't have all the answers, but a healthy economy helps all of us. So that's one of the keys.
Next question.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Been dealing with a cough. My name is Carolyn Borgen. I'm from New Ulm, Minnesota. And speaking about the education budget where you gave 2% and it basically kept schools at where they're at right now, and then you're talking about looking to the future of what's happening at the federal level. And as a parent with an 8-year-old in the public school system, which we truly believe in, and we have a great education system in Minnesota and in New Ulm, I'm a wee bit concerned about the cuts the education department at the federal level are proposing and how that's going to affect rural communities with small towns, like, well, it is rural, it's small towns, but where we live. And, we have, 10,000, 12,000 people in a town, and so that truly affects those kinds of cuts. And, and then I think, well, how would we make up for that? And then I think, oh boy, it's going to be more property taxes to make sure that we can maintain the school system where it's at. So, on the state level, I know we have a fine education system, and I'm wondering, you can't predict what's going to happen, but where do you think, how will you protect rural Minnesota and the education system? It's just, Yeah.
That's
Your
well,
wife was in education, so
Yeah.
I'm sure you completely understand my concern.
Well,
so.
that's a pretty broad question. But I think, the legislature has demonstrated its commitment to education through the extra funding on the formula, the 2% and 2%. There's also some other changes in education that aren't quite so popular, but we believe are important. Last in, first out is part of the education bill, where we can try to make sure that we keep the best teachers in front of students that we possibly can by modernizing our system of how we hire and fire. Not so much fire, because we don't very often fire teachers, but how we determine which teachers will be available. There's also modernization of the licensing system. Our system has been a blockade, frankly, for folks coming from out of state. If they want to teach in Minnesota, it's been really hard for them to get a license. The changes in this system will make it easier for them to come into Minnesota and become available. What's really been very interesting, as I've watched this over the last number of years, is we used to have, my wife's an elementary teacher, she's retired now. There used to be, they'd have an elementary opening, they'd have a stack of applications, 30, 40, 50 or more applications for one position. Now they're lucky if they get half a dozen applications, and some of those aren't even qualified. So the dynamics have changed, and in some areas we can't even find teachers.
Yeah. And especially in a rural area, to convince young people to come out and move to a town that's more outside of the metro area where they might have a nightlife. And the maintain quality teachers. And I also think about, we do a fantastic job in Minnesota with students who need the help, right? Who are behind school. We really invest in those students. But then you look at the students who are really advanced, and they could use extra help too, just to keep them challenged. And in rural areas, we don't get that extra stuff. And those kids tend to sometimes cause the trouble because then they're bored. So, living in a rural town really is something more unique than the metro area. In the metro area, they have like a ton of options. And they have the nightlife to help bring in those young people to fill in the positions. But I just worry about the future, like any parent.
Well, of course, and we're all concerned about that. But it's a very difficult challenge to change people's habits and how they approach what they think of as a lifestyle they appreciate. We have seen, I think, we tend to lump the millennials all into one bag, and I don't think that's appropriate. There's a lot of young people that do appreciate small town life and are willing to come to small towns and live. We just need to make sure the opportunities are there. And that's a big challenge. But I'm a small town guy myself. I think small town living is great. I spend part of my life in the metro, and I'm always glad to get out. The other issue, you mentioned the amount of money that's going into our metropolitan schools. They get a lot more money per student than we get out here in rural Minnesota, yet they have this huge disparity problem that really is unsolvable, it seems. We keep dumping more money in, and the disparities don't go away. I think we need to figure out a better way to address those issues and keep the kids that are the group of kids that are having trouble succeeding in school. We need to think of new ways to give them opportunities to succeed, because this gap is something that I think we're all kind of ashamed of, frankly.
And one of the issues is, if you take a look at it, Paul alluded to it, the amount of money that some of the schools in the Twin Cities get versus what we get out of here on your formula. Sometimes they're as high as twice as much as we get out here, which is really tough. We have higher graduation rates, we have better attendance rates, we have better grade averages, which says an awful lot about the teachers we have in rural Minnesota. But it's tough to start equalizing those dollars, so one way that we do that is through formula. And that's why I push so hard to keep the monies going to the formula versus to going to specific categoricals, because when they go to specific categoricals, we will lose to the metropolitan area just about all the time. If we put it on the formula and then put it on the basic formula without all of the other classifications, a student in New Ulm gets the same as a student in Minneapolis. And so that starts closing that gap. We've done that the last couple of sessions now when we've had money go into education, it's went in the formula, and we do it on the basic formula, because that helps us get closer to closing that gap. Because it's unfortunate that there's a lot of programs that we can't provide out here that in the cities, and you talk about foreign languages, if we have one in the school out here, or two, we're very fortunate. We feel very lucky. In the cities, they'll have 15 to 20, maybe even as high as 30 in the one school I'm familiar with, foreign languages. And yet, our students are only maybe getting 1, 2 at the most. So those are the things we have to try to do, is start equalizing those dollars better, and one way to do it is to do it with a basic formula. We got we got time for one more question.
Maybe two. Maybe two.
Hi. Well, my name is Sonia Steinbeiser. I'm from New Ulm here. I just wanted to talk about, again, with this, what you were talking about with the students, and you mentioned disparities among students and everything. And when it comes to the federal budget cut from Trump, he's talking about cutting anti-bullying programs and all these things, and you're talking about the mental health of students. Well, you know, if you care about the mental health of students, then why are you cutting anti-bullying programs? That speaks to me greatly because I was bullied in high school. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to, and you talk about reform and looking to the future, I also want to ask you about how you guys feel about single payer that is mentioned from Bernie Sanders, and there's other politicians out there that support it, because that cuts, you know, the bureaucracy dealing with the insurance companies and everything, and then just having Medicare for everyone. And that actually cuts the cost from $20 trillion down to $11 trillion, which then needs to be covered. But I just want to know how you guys feel about those issues.
Yeah, well, we're very short on time, and those are big questions. I do not favor single payer myself. I don't think that's the way this country should go. That's not what our healthcare system was built on. It would be a huge shift. And what we found, and this is very general, but government-run programs tend to pay inadequately to the providers. I was on a hospital board in St. James for 12 years, and our Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements were so low that we had to charge everybody else more in order to make up for what the government wasn't supplying. If we went to single payer, I'm afraid we'd have that system spread across the board, and we'd underfund our system of healthcare, which is, in my mind, in many ways the best in the world. Your other question about federal involvement in education, luckily the feds don't fund our schools generally. It's funded at the local and state level. President Trump does not call me and ask me what he should do with the education budget.
I also do not support single payer. If we take a look at MNsure, I think that should be a lesson we should have learned about single payer. Let's take a look at California. They just done an analysis to find out if they went to single payer health insurance. Just in the state of California, the single payer health insurance will cost more. It'll cost 10% more than their whole budget is right now. So we have to look at the cost versus the results, and I think MNsure probably showed us how that process probably is not the best process to go. One more question over here, and then we have to close it up.
Thank you. My name is Peg Sundell. I live in New Ulm. I have two quick questions. One is a clarification. You talked about the schools in the metro area having 15 languages. Do they teach 15 languages, or do the children speak 15 different languages?
No, there are some schools that actually have 15 languages that are being taught. Not 15 students or 15 different languages. They're being actually taught that number of languages, which puts us at a disadvantage. Second question.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for coming, but I'd like to encourage you to continue to have these and have them at various times so that people that are working shifts, you talk about helping the working people, most of us here are retired, and I'd like to encourage you to have it at a different time so other people can come. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for that input, and we'll take that into consideration. Thank you all for coming today.